Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas using the source material itself. So today, we're going to tackle a really explosive question. How many government jobs is just too many for one person to hold? This all leads to a major constitutional showdown.
All right, so first things first. Let's set the stage for the scandal that really started it all. And look, this wasn't just some minor controversy. This was a practice that sparked total public outrage. And, you guessed it, a landmark legal battle.
I mean, just think about that question for a second. Can one single public official hold 29 government jobs all at once? It sounds absolutely nuts, right? But this very question gets to the heart of what was actually happening during the Marcos administration, and it was a practice that, for many people, felt like a complete abuse of power.
Yeah, 29. Just let that number sink in for a second. That was a number of government board memberships held by just one official. This wasn't just a side gig. We're talking about a whole system of interlocking power.
And get this, it wasn't just some one-off thing. A 1983 audit revealed this whole roster of top officials holding a staggering number of offices. I mean, look at these numbers. When the public found out, they were just furious. It looked like a total betrayal of public trust.
So, after all that, when the framers of the 1987 Constitution got together, they were determined to make sure this could never, ever happen again. But in trying to fix it, they actually created two different rules, which, believe it or not, set the stage for a whole new conflict down the road.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the difference here. For the president and their cabinet, there's a strict rule. They can only hold another office if the Constitution itself says they can. But for everyone else, there's a general rule, whereas simple law can create an exception. That's a huge difference, right? One is basically set in stone, the other is way more flexible. And, you probably see where this is going, that crucial distinction became the absolute heart of the conflict when a new presidential order came out that seemed to just completely blur those lines.
So in 1987, President Corazon Aquino issues this thing, Executive Order 284. Now, it was supposed to set some limits, but critics immediately jumped on it, arguing that it did the exact opposite, that it was prying open loopholes the Constitution was written to seal shut for good.
So what did this order actually do? Well, take a look. It basically said that the top officials, we're talking cabinet members, undersecretaries, could hold up to 2 additional government jobs. And the justification for this was that it was allowed under that more relaxed general rule.
And that right there, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Was the president's inner circle, the cabinet, supposed to be governed by that flexible general rule? Or did the framers intend for them to be held to that super strict, almost absolute ban? Well, there was only one place to get the answer: the Supreme Court.
So yep, the case went all the way to the top. The Supreme Court had to settle this fundamental debate. Was this executive order constitutional? Or did it fly in the face of the very spirit of what the Constitution was trying to do?
And the court's answer? Bam! Unconstitutional. They didn't mince words. They struck down Executive Order 284, declaring it null and void. They said it was a direct violation of that strict rule meant for the president and the cabinet. Period.
So you might be wondering, how did they get there? Well, they went right back to the source, to the people who wrote the Constitution. And their logic is crystal clear in this quote from Commissioner Vicente Foz. He basically says, look, the people at the top have the most power, so there's more potential for abuse. That's why we have to be stricter with them. It was completely intentional.
This is a really key takeaway. The ruling basically said that the Constitution treats the president, the VP, and their cabinet as a special group, a class by itself. They're held to a higher standard precisely because of the enormous power and public trust that's placed in them.
But is that ban on holding other jobs totally absolute? No exceptions at all? Well, not exactly. The court did carve out one very specific, very important clarification, mainly to keep the government from just grinding to a halt.
They talked about something called an ex-officio position. It's a fancy Latin term, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It just means by virtue of office. It's not a new job. It's not a separate appointment. It's just an extra duty that's considered part of your main job. You know, like the Secretary of Finance sitting on the Monetary Board, that just makes sense as part of their job.
But, and this is a big but, the court was super careful not to create some massive new loophole. So they laid out these 3 really strict conditions, and you have to meet all of them. The extra duty has to be essential to your main job, it has to be legally attached to the office, and, this is the big one, you cannot get a single extra cent for it. No extra pay.
So after all this legal back and forth, what's the big takeaway here? Why does this one case, this ruling from decades ago, still matter so much for how we think about public service today?
I think this quote from the Supreme Court's decision just says it all, really. Being a cabinet secretary isn't just a full-time job, it's more than a full-time job. The court recognized that you can't have these officials spreading their time and energy so thin. It leads to bad government, and it's a disservice to the public.
So the legacy here is huge. This wasn't just some technical ruling about jobs. It's really a cornerstone of public service ethics. It reinforces this fundamental idea that public office is a public trust. It prevents power from getting too concentrated, and it makes sure our leaders are focused on the incredibly important jobs we hired them to do.
And that really leaves us with a big question to think about, doesn't it? If we all agree that the highest offices need the strictest rules to protect public trust, then how should we apply that same principle to all the complex challenges of governing that we face today? The answer isn't simple, but the conversation is essential. Thanks for joining this explainer.